Man, I'm excited about today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about something that hopefully all of us are doing fairly regularly, and that is thinking. I will tell you about a book on the subject that has had a tremendous impact on my life on this episode of Coleman Nation. Let's go. When I was 14 and in high school, I did an elective course on logic. I kind of dismissed it at the time, but it sowed some seeds of deep understanding of thinking and logic that would change my life forever. The textbook for this course was this book right here, and it's called The Thinking Book. And this was an absolutely awesome book. When I was 14, 15 years old, going to summer school, which I'll tell that story in a second. It was just one of these books that I really took for granted. I don't know if you ever been in a situation where you read a book when you were younger and you didn't fully appreciate it till later, but that's what this book was for me. So I'll leave a link in the description below. I'll provide links to Amazon and the publisher's website where you can get the book for yourself. And I really think for anyone that's thinking about homeschooling, and teaching their kids about logic and thinking, this is a priceless book. Absolutely incredible. But today I'm going to go, I'm going to talk about some of the vital things that I learned from it and how it made a difference in my life and being able to think and process information and come to good conclusions about things, especially in situations where, I might not have all of the data. How can I gather it and then make the right decisions? So, first, here's a little bit of backstory. From the time that I was old enough to go to school, I was in and out of public schools and private schools. My mom and dad always wanted me to go to private school for the value of the education. They always knew, like, look, we got to make sure our kids are well educated. But the problem is that they couldn't always afford it. I had plenty of times where it was like, hey, by the way, you're going to go on spring break. But for you, spring break isn't 2 weeks, it's going to be 6 weeks. Right. And so there was a lot of times, same thing, over the Christmas break. It would be like, hey, we're going on Christmas break, but it's not going to be 2 weeks, from Christmas through New Year's. It's going to be like 6 weeks. And so there was a lot of times where I would have like longer than normal vacations. And otherwise, I was just in public school. Right. So one summer, when I was a teenager, the opportunity came up for me to go to a private boarding school in Oregon, one that was in the same network of schools that I had been attending on and off in Southern California. And I'd always dreamed of being able to go to that school, but my parents couldn't afford it. This one summer, the school offered an opportunity for a work study program in which I would be able to work at the school part time and study part time. It was an 8-week summer program. I was very excited for it. And so for the program, I had to fill out an application. And this is a little bit of the a funny part of the story is that because I was attending the sister school in Southern California, and it was like the main school was up in Oregon. I had a situation where they said the kids in Southern California are way too like coddled and they have way too much, privilege and all that kind of stuff. Cause we used to be able to get out at lunchtime and drive to McDonald's and go off campus and like, go home and we go to the movies. And we had all this freedom that teenagers would have. But when you're up in a boarding school, you can't do any of that stuff. Everything's very regimented and all and controlled. And so they said, we got to send these kids to the school up in Oregon so that they can live a more disciplined lifestyle. I don't know if that was true, but we had fun. But I'll tell you, when we had this process where I had to go fill out applications, we had to actually fill out an application like we were going in for a job. And they asked what was the job that I wanted on the work portion of the application. So all the other applicants, that were going, meeting my other friends in my class in high school, had gotten the inside scoop, and specifically the girls. Okay, so the girls had other friends that were going to the school up in Oregon, and so all the girls were told, hey, when you're putting down what job to have as the job for the summer program, put down English as a second language, because this is apparently a really cushy job, getting to hang out with, kids from Japan and Mexico and Italy and France and South America and all these different countries. And they would wind up teaching kids how to speak English. Well, none of the girls decided to share that with me or the other guys that were going up there. And so the guys were set, we sat down there and we were just put down like, okay, on the job application, what job do you want? Right. And so I just put on the application, I said, I don't care, right? I don't care. And that was interpreted. I mean, what I really meant was I'll take whatever job is necessary, like whatever you want me to do. I'm excited about the opportunity to go to school. But when that was received, I don't care was interpreted as having some sort of a major attitude problem. So I should insert here that the girl that was in charge of assigning jobs had decided that I had an attitude problem because of what I said, that I don't care and that I should be punished. So I arrived in Oregon and I got the job of breakfast prep. So I had to be in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning preparing breakfast for 400 students and staff. And then I also got assigned dishwashing duty after dinner, right? And so the last crew washing dishes. Basically, this meant that my day started super early and I ended super late. So sometimes, like I said, I had to be at work making eggs for 400 kids at 5:30 in the morning. But then I would have nighttime dish duty, and all the rest of the dish guys, the breakfast crew and the lunch crew would leave all the really grungy dishes, the big pots and all the, baking things and all that kind of stuff for me to wash at the end. And so I might have, like 4 hours of sleep a night. I am 100% certain that this probably at the time would have violated about a dozen child labor laws. But this was in the 1980s. And at the time, nobody gave a crap. It was totally acceptable. I'm like, thankfully, we weren't working in the mines in the in the 1800s and stuff like that. I would definitely not want to work in the mines. But at this time, I took an elective class during that period of time on logic and thinking. And there was a lot of stuff that we were learning. We read The Republic of Plato, and we read, all these different books, about logic and thinking, and we analyzed all that kind of stuff. And, it was really, there was some good things that were going on, and some of the literature classes that I had. But this one in particular was a very structured course, an elective course on the subject of thinking and logic. The textbook was the thinking book. This book actually was my dad's copy of the book. I didn't even know he had a copy of this book, right? But this one just sort of appeared in storage, and I managed to pull it out and was excited to talk about this episode. So, anyways, it was really really kind of cool. That my dad was thinking about these things too, and I think that he probably was inspired by when I was a kid. He got this book for himself. I was like, hey, if my kids learn this stuff, I think I'm going to learn it too. So as I started, read the book, I was like any other teenager going back to the beginning of time, is tell me why I have to learn this stuff. So in this case, I was really going to have that question answered well, right? Like very well. So this book includes exercises on thinking and processing information and questions to determine whether something is logical. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this class and this book were going to become deeply ingrained in me, right? So the first thing that they do is they define what thinking is. And the definition reads, thinking is observing things and comparing them to what you've seen or gotten answers about before, so that you can get answers about how things are or decide what to do. So it's being able to take some information, process it, figure out what you're going to decide about it, and then what actions you're going to take as a result. So thinking is constant comparative analysis, right? It's taking a piece of information, verifying if it's true, and comparing it to other things and verifying if those are true. You then start to extrapolate and synthesize answers based on this analysis. And by the way, I think we need more of that in society today. I mean, how many times have people just taken things that the media said at face value only to find out that those things are totally not true? I wonder, right? So the book covers in detail why people have a hard time thinking, right? Today I've heard some people say in different podcasts, do you ever think about what you're thinking about? And up until this time, as a kid, when I was a teenager, no one had ever told me to stop and think about what I was thinking about, right? This was the first time I got the idea of thinking about what I was thinking about was reading this book and doing this elective course and analyzing it to draw conclusions on different things. Today, I think it's freaking awesome, right? But I didn't think so at the time being a teenager. Isn't it true that teenagers know everything? It's unbelievable why we don't put more teenagers in charge of things because they apparently know everything. I was no different, right? So to really learn a subject, you have to go through various layers of agreement before it really hits home. And I had to go through that. I had to basically sit there and go, I don't agree with any of this stuff. I don't want to learn these things. Yeah, it's an elective. And yeah, I chose to do it. What did I really want to do? I just wanted to be able to hang out in the library and, and not do anything really. I was tired. It was crazy. But, anyways, we'll get to that part of the story in a second. So, a whole chapter in the book is called How to Think Well. It says that to be able to think well, you must be able to recognize differences. It says, what if someone could not tell if two things were not the same? It shows a guy holding a pie and thinking it's a ball, and he tries to bounce the pie on the ground, and obviously it's a disaster. The pie explodes. Well, being able to tell differences is a hallmark of being able to think well. If you can't tell that two things are different, you're crazy. You're insane. Okay. I mean, that's literally the definition, which we'll cover in a second. Next, you have to be able to tell when things are similar. There's a picture of someone looking at a duck, then looking at a chicken, and saying, oh, this other thing that looks similar must be the same. It must be a duck too. If someone cannot tell the differences between the similarities, if they cannot discern similarities between two things, they would not be able to think well either. Okay. Then it goes into sort of, the third part of this, which is it goes into identities. What if someone could tell when two things were the same? It's just someone looking at one ball and then grabbing another ball. They're perfectly identical in every way, but because they're in, I don't know, different spaces or whatever differences are perceived, the person becomes confused. So you have to be able to see when two things are identical to be able to see that something is the same as something else. So if you were, swapping parts in a, like a gear in some sort of like you're fixing an engine or a car or something like that or some machine, and you had two identical gears, right? If you were like, oh my gosh, these things are so different, I can't tell. But you couldn't tell that they were the same. I mean, it would cause again chaos. You wouldn't be able to make the right decisions. So the definition of sanity in this book has stuck with me my whole life from when I was a teenager. And the definition is this: sanity is the ability to recognize differences, similarities, and identities. And I want you to just think about that definition for a second. The ability to discern differences, identities, and similarities. This describes someone who can think well. And when applied, this definition would result in sane people. Okay. Some other definitions from dictionaries, include the ability to think in a rational and normal manner. The problem with that definition is that normal and rational is not defined, leaving some therapists to decide what it means, or worse, someone deciding if someone needs drugs or institutional treatment based on their own interpretation of this definition of what's normal. So, another definition is soundness of mind, soundness of judgment. That's another definition that comes from the dictionary. But again, what does soundness actually mean? Yet another is the state of having a healthy mind and not being mentally ill. Same problem. What is the definition of a healthy mind, right? These definitions may or may not result in sane people and most likely would not result in sanity. So I was really blown away by the definition of sanity in this book. Once again, it's the ability to recognize differences, similarities, and identities. From that definition, a person can align their actions and thinking towards being more sane, which is incredible. The more that you're able to discern these things, you'll go out thinking about this definition and seeing people like that you would, like people say, oh, well, that person's obviously crazy. Why are they crazy? Right? Why is someone considered insane? is because they cannot tell the differences between these three things: differences, similarities, and identities. I teach financial literacy and education about how money works. This definition of sanity is very important in my field. After the book establishes thinking, what thinking is, it covers the difference between fact and opinion. Well, I don't know about you guys, but endless times when I've been watching, news or watching the media, I've seen very clearly opinions presented as facts and facts, vice versa, presented as opinions. And I'm not favoring any left or right leaning news source or anything like that. All news media, I don't care what channel it is, all news media tends to mix up facts and opinions. Okay, and make them somewhat interchangeable. The book covers the difference, which will become clear as we go on. Okay, what's the difference between opinions and facts? So the book defines what data is, which is anything you can know. Isn't that an interesting definition? Anything that you can know is considered data. This then it defines logical. From this, it defines logical. And the definition is so simple. When things or data make sense, they're logical. And when they don't make sense, they're illogical. What's interesting is that there are vast volumes and tomes that have been written on what logic is. But that one definition given in this book pretty much sums up the whole idea that when things or data make sense, they're logical. When they don't make sense, they're illogical. So the subject of logic is using logical data to think clearly and make good decisions. In this book, the word illogic is used as a noun. Okay. And illogic is something that doesn't make sense. There are five primary illogics. They're primary because they're the most important ones, right? And this, it goes through, by the way, there's 14 different logics and 14 different illogics. And, they're really, really good, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll let you get the book so you can kind of, discover it for yourself. The first primary illogic is omitted data. For example, someone tells you to meet them at noon, but doesn't tell you where to meet them. Where are you supposed to go? It wouldn't make any sense. When you omit information from something, it becomes something you can't use. The rest of the information doesn't matter with part of it omitted. Okay, so that is really, really important. And I think that, at some point in time, we've all been in that situation where someone says, "Hey, I'll see you for lunch tomorrow." And you go, and you're like, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." And then you go, "Oh, I didn't set the restaurant or we didn't set a time." Right. So that concept, and again, some of these may sound very oversimplified, but when you start to be aware, again, what's the concept? Are you thinking about what you're thinking about? Right. Or are you just letting data and information come in that's unfiltered? This is going to give you this book, which is amazing to me. It gives you the ways to filter information in order to be able to have sort of a side check as to whether things make sense or not, and allows you to open up the door for more questions. Okay. So the second primary illogic is called altered sequence. It describes doing things in the wrong order. The book gives an example of someone pouring water before they put the glass below the source of water, right? So you got, you're pouring a pitcher and then there's nothing there. What's going to happen? The water's going to dump everywhere. And then after the water's been dumped out, then you put the cup there. That is the wrong or altered sequence, right? That's the altered sequence. So another example of finding, is finding someone guilty and then giving them a trial afterwards. So everyone votes that the person is guilty, but then none of the information is presented until after the person's been guilty, right? The media is great at doing this in the court of public opinion, right? And so you start seeing these things and going, well, that's not the right order of doing it. Okay. The third primary illogic is called dropped time, which is a specific type of metadata. When I was a kid, this one was one of my favorite to use. I'd say to my mom, pick me up at, 5 o'clock. That's when everything will be done. Right. So in truth, everything was done at 3 o'clock, but I wanted to, play video games and hang out with my friends. Right. So I would just kind of like, mess around with time. And this is something that you'll see the media does all the time. They'll say, well, this certain, war was fought, blah, 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 blah. And it was something that was like 100 years ago. Right. So they use these tools in order to be able to leave certain information out. And by the way, we all have done it and are guilty of doing these things in the past. It's funny how smart I thought I was when I was a teenager And I look back on it, I was like, man, my parents let me get away with a lot of things because they're like, I look back at some of the things that I probably said, and I was like, man, that was so stupid. Like I sounded so dumb, but I was like, they didn't call me on it. I appreciate that, right? I have to learn my own, from my own mistakes. So, but I used to admit times when, things needed to be done all the time. My mom would ask, when do you have to have your homework, done? And I'd give the answer, oh, it's fine. It's kind of open ended. I get lots of trouble for this type of thing. I was like all the time. I just wouldn't tell people the amount of time that would be necessary. Another example of dropped out time would be, telling someone, don't be late for the meeting, but then not telling them what time the meeting actually is. So again, this is very similar to omitted data, but it has just a little bit specifically dealing with time. So the fourth primary logic is falsehood. That's when someone literally tells a lie. Someone says something is food, but it's actually a bunch of rocks and mud shaped like a piece of bread. If someone did that to you, you'd be pretty angry. You'd be pretty upset. Okay. So just a straight up falsehood is a lie, something that's just not true. Now, and again, this isn't a political statement. This isn't a left or right thing. This is just every time you look in the media on either side, they are telling things that are not true and they're framing things in a way. And this is why I'm kind of doing this particular episode is because we need to be able to engage sort of more filters in our thinking, sort of like what would be the antivirus of our mind is being able to identify things that are logical or illogical, and then being able to run through a filter, run them through a sort of a questioning process. And then when that becomes reflexive, you get into a position where you don't take, BS garbage that's coming in from sources without automatically it becomes reflexive that hey, I need to check this. You become your own internal fact checker instead of just accepting everything that's presented to you as true, right? So, or I've seen this happen to you where you accept everything from another particular source as false, right? So it cuts both ways, okay? And being able to, sort of evaluate the information is going to help everyone in society, think better and ask more questions and be able to engage more in order to synthesize better solutions for the future civilization. That's the whole reason why, again, I'm doing this talk, right? Doing this channel. So the fifth primary logic is altered importance. This means having something important that you think is not important, or having something that is not important and thinking it's very important. So an example would be crying over spilled milk. Spilled milk is not that important. Okay. So hence the saying, don't cry over spilled milk. It means it's not that big a deal. So you've ever seen people blowing things out of proportion or being super dismissive of important things, or perhaps someone you don't know all that well gets really upset because you missed their birthday. With an understanding of these illogics, you can simply classify such a person as someone altering the importance of something, you know, now, this gets dangerous because as a husband, you may go, oh, like, I don't think that a birthday is that important at all. That may be true in your mind, but don't try to test this with your wives or your kids. Okay. Birthdays are very important. But again, isn't that a source of ultra importance? I'll give you a true story about this. When I was a kid, one of my friends in elementary school, he said, hey, do you want to come over and play video games after school? And I was like, yeah, for sure. I don't have anything else going on. Right. So I went over to my friend's house. We played video games for a few hours. I was wandering around, I grew up on Capitol Hill, which probably isn't the greatest place for, little kids to be wandering around by themselves. But I would wander around in Capitol Hill in Seattle. And, it was a different time in the 80s and whatnot. But I wound up going home and and I told my friend, I said, yeah, I think I'm supposed to go to dinner with my folks or something like that, but it's not that big a deal. I'll play video games. And I went home and it was my mom's birthday. And my dad had this whole thing planned out for her birthday. And I got absolutely, I've never been yelled at so much in my life. You ruined the birthday. What's wrong with you? Blah, 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 blah. It was pretty, so for me, I altered the importance of just a random dinner that I was supposed to have with my folks. And I did give it the proper importance, and it upset everybody, messed up schedules, blah, blah, blah. I think we had dinner reservations that we weren't able to make. And at that time, we didn't have cell phones. So I couldn't, there was no way for my folks to know, it was just like, let's just wait till he gets home, you know? And so, anyway, that's just one of those things where the importance was altered by me in relationship to something that was super important. So, the five primary illogics are again, omitted data, altered sequence, dropped out time, falsehood, and altered importance. So once you start to recognize these, you'll be reading an article and see, for example, where someone dropped out a period of time. It will say something like he was known to have ties to, such and such terrible group of people. In actuality, it turns out he went to the same school as one of the bad guys in whatever group 40 years ago, right? That they have ties to. Like you hear these generalities in the media, it'll start to drive you crazy. You go, well, who was it? When was it? What was the exact nature of this relationship? Is it something that happened currently? Was this, you just start digging in and not taking all this information at face value. So when you understand this basic information, you start seeing things that just don't make any sense. I highly recommend this book if you're homeschooling again or teaching your kids about thinking and what makes sense. It's written for a fourth or fifth grader at level, right, of literacy. But I did it when I was 14, 15 years, 14, 15 years old in that range, and the information is so good, especially for someone beginning their teenage years. It really helped me to figure out when to call BS on my friends if I needed to. It made me aware of the need to say, hey, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. I will tell you that it was a little bit of a double edged sword because it also made me a better BSer with my folks. But and it also made me very good at arguing things with people because I would call them out on things if they were missing information or I felt that their thought process wasn't completely up to par. I would be in debate class when I was later, like 17, 18 years old, and I would start calling people, where did you get that information? What's the specifics about it? When did that occurrence happen? I'd start grilling people. And so does it make you a little bit better if you wanted to like become, someone that was in a like debating ideas or things like, yeah, it actually would. I think that this book would be a very, very good primer for that type of concept. So when things don't make sense, people try to make them make sense anyway. Okay. They'll take something that literally makes no sense at all and try to justify how it is logical, even though it's not. People do this all the time. Now, let's discuss what the book calls the logics. These are the five logical points that result in logical conclusions, and they correlate or are related to the illogics. Okay, so the first primary logic is all related facts known. This means having all the information that relates to what you're studying or dealing with, all the true facts necessary to make a viable decision. So, for example, you're baking a cake, you would have the exact step-by-step instructions and all the ingredients, tools needed to be able to do it. So that would be something that where you have all the related facts. Now, I was baking a cake once, and there was one piece of the information that was kind of left out. So I actually had to make a couple of cakes and see, well, do they mean to add, the butter at this point, or is it added at this point? And so I wound up experimenting, and I was able to figure it out, but I actually had to make one bad cake in order to figure out how to make one that wasn't so like, there's more fluffy versus. So anyways, you start to get these things where you're starting to process information and draw better conclusions. So that's the first one. The second primary logic is being logical is correct sequence. You place the glass and then pour the water. You have a trial and then decide if someone is guilty. So you can see, right, whether they're guilty or not. So this is how these things are related. The third primary logic is time noted. That means the actual time. For example, I'll see you at 3 o'clock. I'll meet you for lunch at noon tomorrow. Now, if we don't say where, that's metadata. Okay. So we say, I'll see you at the cafe on Cleveland at 3 o'clock p.m. today. Then you know exactly when and where. Related facts are known and the time is noted. Okay. So the fourth primary logic is data proven factual. The corresponding illogic is a falsehood. Okay. So data proven factual means that it's true. Falsehood means that it's proven that it was a lie. This has been going on forever. Like a great example is big pharma, big ag, all the things having to do with our health, all of the things that have to do with our wellnesses, all that kind of stuff. This data is coming out that a lot of, falsehoods have been given to us over the past 30, 40, 50 years in order to be able to sort of deplete the nation's health reserves. I'm not going to get into a whole argument on that, but the point is that there are things that don't make sense. Okay. And so you start looking at this and it says to you, I'm 5'8" tall, and you measure their height and it's 5'8", then that's data proven factual, right? They say that they're this tall, and then that's proven true. So anyway, it's kind of funny. I remember seeing an example of that exactly, and I'm just remembering it was Ben Shapiro on stage. Someone said, "Oh, I don't think you're 5'8", and he's, well, how old are you, or how tall are you, or 5'9", and the guy goes, "Well, I'm 5'9", and they get up and they're exactly the same height. So that's what data proven factual. Okay, so in another example, you observe, as someone is a bad person, they're a creep, they're totally disgusting. You observe this for yourself, then it's true. But if someone told you that this person was a creep, and you should talk to them, and you observe that not to be true, then you know that it's a falsehood, or you at least don't have enough information to make a conclusion. The data proven factual is very important to logical thinking. And by the way, you can continue to ask for more information until you prove that it's a falsehood or that it's a fact, right? And people should be asking for more information in order to be able to determine what's true and what's false. The fifth primary logic is correct relative importance. Correct relative importance. This correlates to the illogic of altered importance. Okay. So let's say a giant tiger was about to jump out of the bushes and eat you, and you knew it, but you didn't run. You just casually whistled on by, right? You're treating something that's important as if it weren't important, right? It should be given its proper importance so you don't get eaten. Now, I'm going to tell you this right now. I know that you're not supposed to run from tigers. You're supposed to, there was this whole article about tigers that you can dramatically reduce the people that are eaten by tigers if you wear a mask behind you. Is from my friends over at Waft. They told me this great story. Philip, totally awesome story about, predators. But the point is that if you're just not giving it the due importance that a lion or a tiger is about to come out and jump at you, you're going to get eaten. Okay. If you don't do the right things, that's the whole point. So people can be driven crazy sometimes by seeing things that aren't given their proper importance, or by seeing things blown way out of proportion in regards to their actual importance. So giving the correct relative importance to something is vital in logical thinking. So you can see how these things fit in. To me, as a 14-year-old kid who never even considered these types of things, it was pretty life-changing. You're analyzing the things that you think about and processing data as it comes in. You're asking if something makes sense or does it not make sense. If it doesn't make sense, you reject it or ask for more information, right? And I think that kids, they rely too much on authority today. And this is something that after I did this course when I was, this elective course when I was a kid, that I stopped taking authority, seriously. I was like starting to ask questions. Why do you think this way? What's your conclusion? Right? Why do you do that? And it was annoying to my teachers at the time, but I think it worked out pretty well for me. And I think that they were happy with the end result. Right. So having the tools of logic from this book made me very dangerous as a kid, whether to my parents or to the teacher. If I could outthink them, I would win. I felt that I could be very resourceful. I could look for patterns and seek paths to success for things that I was undertaking. Well, this is just a preview of the thinking book. In total, there are 14 illogical ways to think. They call these out points in the book. There's a total of 14 logical ways to think, and they call those plus points. I've covered the primary 5 of each, so there are 9 more in each to be found in the book, which are pretty awesome. And when you read through these, you'll be like, oh my gosh, why don't I have these tools? Like every kid should have this. You should definitely get this book. You should read it and and get the rest of them yourself. But this is really essential information. It will make you a super sleuth. It gives you a great way to deal with things like the news media. But I'll end with this story. When I was taking this class back at the boarding school, one of the exercises was to go through a newspaper and find 20 instances of logical thinking that made sense and 20 instances of illogical thinking that didn't make sense, just by grabbing any random newspaper and going through it. Right. So now you can just go on to any, article on one of the news media sites. And again, I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. You can do this with either side. In fact, I would challenge you to do this exercise looking at various news sources. So, but one of the illogics that they cover in the book I didn't discuss today is one called contrary facts. For example, you see an article about a CEO who wasn't in the country during a certain period of time. Later in the article, it says that the guy never left the country during that same time. So you go, hey, wait, you say he wasn't there, but early in the article you said he was there. Which is it? After reading some articles and spotting some of the contrary facts, these are two facts that do not go together, right? You won't take things at face value anymore because obviously, if someone's going to put into their article two things that don't correlate or that they are in conflict with each other, well, this person obviously didn't do their research or they're not able to think. Why should I trust that source anymore? So when I did this exercise in school, I was amazed at what I found just seeking out 40 examples of logical and illogical thinking in a newspaper. I couldn't believe that people were paid money to report this kind of thing. News is full of inconsistencies. It was really eye opening to read the news from this perspective, to see these inconsistencies with my own eyes as a 14-year-old kid and realize that this is where people get their information. So from that point, it made me super skeptical. Okay. I would continue to ask questions until it was proven or disproven and I could draw logical conclusions from it. So, how did this serve me later in life? Well, here's one example. As a school alumnus, I participated in a debate between students and alumni. The subject was whether or not private schools should accept state funding via school vouchers. Okay. So, the automatic consensus was yes, they should accept government funding. The thought was that so much more could be done for private education, right, if students got money, from the government. And so the case for getting these school vouchers had clear majority of support. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be awesome, it's going to be incredible. So I took the against side. I took the contra side of school vouchers, right? Because I knew that free money is never free. It always comes with attachments. There's always a gotcha, right? The students took the pro side, right? There was a coin flip. What are you going to take? The students took the pro side and they assumed that they were going to slaughter the alumni. It seemed like such a logical argument. Okay. And so there was a coin flip. This automatically threw them off. They wanted the pro side and they thought we wanted the pro side because it would be the easier argument to take free money from the government. But the alumni won the coin flip, and I insisted that we take the contra side against school funding for private schools. So as we were going through the debate, the students would bring up some authority. We would counter with, well, who is that? Why is that person an authority? What does that person, stand to gain from saying that this is how things should be and why, there should be government funding for schools? What happens if we let funding in? Let's carry that lot to its logical conclusions. What standards are going to be in place? What standards do we have now? Are we pretty happy with them? Oh, if we are happy with them, we start letting government funding in, right? Does that give them the ability to influence what our standards are for the graduation of students, right? So I started pressing these students on all of these issues, and I was pressing them hard on these things. So at the beginning of the debate, the teachers fully supported taking the funding. So they were like, we're going to juice up our bottom line. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have, open up, more facilities, and we're going to be able to do all kinds of great things. By the time we were done, they had completely reversed their stance because of the argument of me and my fellow alumni. They realized that taking government subsidies would change their ability to deliver their curriculum. It would have been letting the fox into the henhouse, if you understand the effectiveness of the California educational system, right? That it is very suspect to be able to let them in. They're already in, just sort of ubiquitous within the schooling system, whether you're private or public schools. But the point is that by giving them, sort of this open back door to manage your curriculum and the standards that you have, I was like, this is very, very dangerous. So, by the way, memorizing and mastering these logics and illogics fully, which isn't all that difficult, could lead you to become excellent at debate. Like some of the debaters, of our time, such as, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and Poole, right? When you're arguing with someone, you can find out how much they really understand what they're talking about. And by the way, I've been caught flat footed when I'm in debates too, where like, crap, I didn't do my homework. It's terrible. It's a terrible feeling. But these 28 points, the 14 on the logic side, the 14 on the illogic side will give you threads to pull on, which again isn't all that difficult because they're all cross-related. Well, this is an awesome book. Again, it's called the Thinking Book. Right. This is it right here. It's based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard, philosopher and great thinker. It's published by a company called Heron Books. You can get it on the publisher's website. You'd also get it on Amazon. I'm going to provide the links in the comments. But I'll tell you this: it has served me very well in analyzing information and situations. The whole point, again, of Coleman Nation is for us to become better thinkers. This book is an absolute knock it out of the park home run, 10 out of 10. It's also something you can teach your kids with. It is great for homeschooling. So in the comments, let me know some of the things that have helped you become a logical thinker. I'm open to it. I want to know, like, what were some of the books that you read? And by the way, I love going back. Like right now, I'm going back and reading some of the books on thinking. Some on empirical learning. Some of the books on like Nietzsche and some of the existentialist stuff. Like these are there's some good things that are out there, but I start looking at things through this lens of asking questions and data synthesis, utilizing this as some of the foundation for it. And it makes you a better logical thinker, and you start to be able to, sniff out the BS when you're reading these things and when you're talking to folks. So what has helped you engage your reasoning and thinking muscles as well? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. So if you've enjoyed this content, make sure that you like and subscribe. Click the notification so that you'll know when we release new episodes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Coleman Nation. Thanks, guys. See you later.